Hello, and welcome back to the Truth of Grief podcast with me and Russell. Today, we're going to be talking about PTSD. So, yes, it's finally nice to have actually an episode where potentially you're answering more questions.
Yeah.
So hopefully I do it some justice as you have on the previous episodes. And where best to start? We've got kids the same age. And something that probably isn't talked about enough is birth trauma. I've experienced probably a small amount of trauma from the birth of our children, me and Lauren. And I know that there is so many different ways children can come out. It's probably worth a conversation as to reaching out to other people and seeing what other people's stories are. So can we elaborate a bit more on yours, Russ? How you've got two boys.
Yeah, two boys, one 2.5, the other just over 3 months now. Similar age to your boys. Yeah, I mean, it's not until recently actually that I've been told that I've got PTSD. I never felt like I did, but I recently started speaking to a therapist, and one of the things he mentioned was that he thinks I have PTSD from in particular, the birth of my second child, because that didn't go smoothly at all, but neither did the first. Unfortunately, I guess diving straight into it is with the birth of our first child. Obviously, first child, don't know what's going on, don't really know what you're doing, just relying on other people to tell you what's going on and what they're doing, like either nurses and doctors and stuff. But ultimately, my wife ended up in labour for... It was well over 24 hours. I don't want to put an hour on it, but it was a long time.
Wow.
And yeah, from the moment we went in to the hospital, and she was told that she was already contracting. I think we went in on a Thursday night, and it wasn't until Saturday afternoon at 5 p.m. he was born. So Thursday night was a bit more chill. But Friday was when, I guess, full-on labour was happening. And ultimately, when it got to Saturday, we had to make the decision because it wasn't progressing the way it should have done. And as a result of that, we had to have an emergency cesarean. I say we. My wife had to have an emergency cesarean, and long and short of it really is on the birth of our first child is that we had to intervene. He had to have various different tests when he was born because he had infections. So he was whisked off to NICU. We didn't see him for a while, and then we was told, we can go over to NICU to see him. He was having a lumbar punch done, and ultimately walked into this room, and there he was in this little incubator type thing. And yeah, it kind of just hit you. It's like, whoa, like that's my boy in there. That's my son. And yeah, it was not the best experience. And whether that's led to any PTSD, I don't think so. But the second birth was even more tough.
Well, let's unravel that first birth. You say that you don't have any PTSD, or you think you might have a little. I mean, even just listening to that, I think we would both agree, and any men listening to this, that our partners and women having the kids albeit we say we're having the baby, and at no point are we underestimating the fact that we've got the easier job. At the same time, you've still got to be feeling, not just for the baby but for your partner. So the worry is twice as much, and just purely talking from the man's perspective, because that's what we're having this conversation about. You're worrying about your partner, your wife, whilst also worrying about your baby, your son. So, it sounds like...
Well, I think, sorry to cut you off there, but I think the thing, yes, obviously you're right. It's like, how can we say it's difficult when, your wife, your partner, whoever's going through that, because that's obviously much more difficult. But in that moment, even if the birth is going smoothly, which I'm guessing here, because unfortunately my two haven't, is it's such a helpless position to be in as a man, to sit there and watch your wife, your partner, girlfriend, whoever, in pain, and you can do nothing about that pain. You just got to sit there, you got to watch, you got to hold their hand, you got to run to the cafeteria if they want a drink or a bit of food, and that's all you can do. And you just got to sit there and just watch them in pain and watch them in agony, and it's horrible. Like it's not something that, I don't know, for something that's so the most natural thing in the world, giving birth or reproducing, it feels so flawed in how it happens. And to, like I say, to sit there and to watch her go through that process is just, you're just helpless. You're literally just sitting there waiting for the baby to come out, and then you can go, right, I could do something now. I can dress my child, I can clean my child, or whatever it might be. But in those few hours to a couple of days when they're going through that, it's just helpless.
Especially how you have such a run up, obviously, finding out the whole time of going through the pregnancy, and you get to that point of, I don't doubt, excitement. You're about to have your first child, and at the same time, like nerves, probably, especially for the mum, like having to give birth for the first time and not knowing what could happen, and there's so many emotions that happen towards having the baby. You just want to have the smoothest, easiest labour and birth that you can. And like you said, when that doesn't happen, especially for the first time, we are so helpless. We can do those small little things to try and help, which at the time are so small, probably aren't even noticed, but what else can we do? So it sounds like, especially what your wife went through, it sounds like you are traumatized by that, just hearing it.
Well, I think for the first birth, no. For the second birth, definitely yes, especially talking about it afterwards. Because I think for the first birth, I think it kind of went like a normal bad birth, I feel like.
What's a normal bad birth? So what's a normal birth?
You have to intervene. A normal birth, you'd have a normal natural birth, natural delivery, and you might be in hospital for 6 to 12 hours, and out you come. Like I know people have done.
Yeah.
Whereas,
so you'd consider yours to be normal bad, and not necessarily just bad.
No, yeah. The with the first, I would normal bad, if that's but in the sense that we had to intervene, otherwise there would have been severe consequences if we carried on naturally. Whether that was to my wife or to my son or to both of them, it got to the point. So on the first birth, my wife just didn't progress as far enough, so he wouldn't come out. And then he got distressed. His heart rate went up, and the doctor basically come in and said, ultimately, we can either intervene now, or in 2 hours they obviously can't force you to do anything, but they'll kind of say we'll be a lot more persuasive to do it in 2 hours time, and like you've kind of run out of time to progress naturally without any consequences. And honestly, at the time, I mean, whether this is because it's your first child, you don't really know what's going on, you don't really understand what the charts are saying and of this nature. It wasn't until about 18 months after the birth, we had when my wife was pregnant with our second, we had like a bit of I don't know what you call it, like a review of the previous birth, because of the complications that happened there.
Is that to avoid it happening again, or to just understand it could happen again?
Probably to understand, because the problems, I can't remember the name of it. I'm sure I'm going to butcher it, but I think there was something called like a bindle ring, which you don't know happens until after birth. Like you don't see it on scans, you don't see it anywhere. It's on the placenta. Right. It's essentially, I don't know what it is essentially, so I don't want to say, but it's not a good thing to have, and it causes a lot of problems. So, and I'm sure there was other things that I'm forgetting about now already, but there was essentially in this review that we had was the nurse was almost like saying, if you had waited that extra 2 hours, the doctor was saying, the outcome would have been very different. Like looking at the charts, she was saying your baby was distressed for a very long period of time, and that baby should have come out a lot sooner than he did. And at the time, we didn't know until she reviewed as well that they were talking about doing that, but they didn't offer it to us because they didn't have the staff to do it. So ultimately, it carried on to that length of time because a surgeon or a nurse or whoever wasn't available to perform the emergency cesarean. And yeah, I think that's a normal bad birth. And I say that because of how the second birth went. Because in the second birth, that's where I think I have got PTSD from it, and this is where I didn't think I had. I didn't think about it until I spoke to someone, and he said to me, "He's like, yeah, I think you have PTSD." And at the start, I was like, "No, I haven't got PTSD. Like, it's just something that happened. We dealt with it. We got through it, and now we're fine." So there wasn't any sort of reason for me to believe I had PTSD. But the reason why he thought that is kind of the opposite problem with our first, because with our first, it was the issue was with our son, and the risk was with our son. Whereas with the second birth, that was all problems with my wife. So essentially, what happened there was similar situation. She was in labour for even longer. We was in what stage is it? When you go past 4 centimeters, you're into active labour.
Yep.
And that was like 26 hours. And after 26 hours, we tried natural, tried everything, and it was not happening. And the uterus becoming swollen, and there was just basically no way that the baby was going to come out naturally. And when we went through to surgery to have the baby come out, everything was fine. Baby was calm, because I was looking out for these things. Like I was like, oh, is the baby's heart rate high? No, it wasn't. It never went above normal. So our child was in there absolutely fine. Didn't have any problems. At the time, until we went into surgery, my wife was absolutely fine. Like, no problem. So it's like, okay, this feels a lot more under control than our first one, because our first one, it felt so rushed. It was like, room, we go straight in there.
Kind of the entire pregnancy was like that? Was the first pregnancy being new until you got to the actual point of birth where you discovered these complications? Was the leading up to the birth of the second child a lot more nerve-wracking, and because you knew that it could be, and there might have been complications coming?
Yes and no.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, because obviously when with the birth of our first, I didn't want that to happen again. Clearly, no one does.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was a lot more clued up on what I was looking out for and what to ask doctors and nurses. Because the first time round, I was in their hands. I'm like, you're just waiting around to go like, okay, what it might be. And because we found out that basically it didn't proceed because of staffing issues, you know, that was the thing that was the forefront of my mind. I want to if that was to happen again, I want to be at that desk saying to them, like, can you, like, my wife's in there giving birth to my child, where the hell is the people? Like, be more forceful. Whereas the first time round, I was like, sat back and I just kind of waited.
Do you not think, I mean, that's like the typical British thing to do, isn't it? As in, British culture is to sort of be the ones that line up in a queue and wait, compared to other cultures and other countries that are a bit more forceful and jump queues, and that's the way that we've always been. We've always been wait to be sort of seen.
Maybe, but that was kind of me as a person. You know, like I'd wait my turn. And with the second one, I was adamant I wasn't going to wait my turn. I was going to make sure, but that was never needed, because this time round, like with our first, you know, we still had a hangover from COVID. And there was still certain implications in place from that. Whereas with the second child, I never felt like there wasn't enough staff. I never felt like there was a problem with that process. It was more, we were just waiting around because he wasn't coming. And then it wasn't until obviously we found out that they did some scans and it was all swollen, and there was a few other complications as well with like her bladder and things like that, which ultimately we didn't really find out the true severity of it until we was in the surgery. Well, even when we was in surgery, it wasn't until post-surgery that we fully understood what happened. So yeah, I mean, I think from me having, I don't know if I have or have not. I haven't really got that far through it yet. But then, you know, the therapist is labelling it as I do have PTSD, and I can see how that could be. But at the same time, I also feel like I'm dealing with it. But ultimately, what happened was a completely normal cesarean, based on my experiences, which is we was in there 10 minutes and the baby was out. Baby was crying more or less straight away. Perfect. Because one of the things that I learned in the process of my first child is when you have a cesarean, babies don't cry straight away like they do with natural births, because the lungs are still full of fluid. So natural birth, it all gets squeezed out. Cesarean, don't worry if they don't cry straight away. Like I think it was like 90 seconds or 60 seconds or something like that, which is still quite a long time for a cesarean. But ultimately, I knew, you know, I wasn't like not crying straight away. So like I knew it was coming. But then from then, the nurse was like, "Oh, Mr. Judd, do you want to come and see your baby?" And I was like, "Oh, this is fine." Because I was at the head of my wife, was behind a curtain. The doctors were like, "Do you want to see the baby coming out?" I was like, "Nope, I don't want to see that." I just, I know some people do. I was like, I can't deal with that, so I'm not going to see that. So I was behind the curtain. My wife was there. She was obviously exhausted from being in labour for 26 hours. But then it was like, "Oh, it's done." The nurse is calling me over. So I was like, okay. So I went round the side, and as I was walking there, I just looked to my left at the table thinking, oh, they must be finished. And they weren't finished, and it was her. Yeah, I can still see it now. Just the stomach was just open, and they was working on her. And we didn't know at the time what was going on. But I had my baby, picked up my baby. They were still working on her. I walked around, sat down next to my wife, and obviously done the usual, "Oh, here's the baby." But then it just went on and on and on and on. And ultimately, she was on the table for over 2 hours, and I was sitting there the whole time in the room with the baby and my wife. And I think the bit that gave me PTSD was because of what I thought happened. She was very drowsy. Obviously, she pumped for the drugs while they're doing this. She's exhausted, not eating properly or drunk properly for the previous however many hours and whatnot. But I remember a nurse from behind me, because we had the curtain in front of me. There was 8 people in the room. There was a nurse behind me, and a nurse helping the doctor who was over her sorting out whatever, and run up beside them and said, "Oh, like, come here." She said, "Oh, can you go and get 2 more units of blood?" And the nurse was like, "Oh, let me go and put that away." But whatever it was, she was like, "No, can you go and get them now?" So I was like, "Oh, that's a bit weird." Like, all of a sudden, and literally 5 seconds later, like, I was talking to my wife. She was holding a sick bucket because they're all messing around inside. Yeah, just you end up throwing up. But she passed out. She went limp. Or her arms went limp. The head went limp. The bowl went on the floor. And for that split second, I thought, she's dead. I was like, she's just died in front of me. Like, the nurse has like been anxious, saying, "Can you like go and get the blood?" And throughout the process, you hear that there was loss of blood. I could see there was blood dripping on the floor. There was big wads of whatever they used to mop up the blood. I could see that get float. So I knew that, like, it wasn't great. And then that happened. She was and I literally for a split second, I thought, she just died. Like, she's in front of me and she just died, like, completely passed out. Sort
the
of
only
thing.
reason why I'm smiling and you're smiling is because we obviously know she's fine.
Yeah.
but it's obviously not a funny situation.
No, it's not.
Christ.
It's not. Well, you're kind of like.
It's like.
Well, it took me a second. I was like, all right, okay. No one in this room is panicking. Just me. Like, my heart has just fallen out of me, holding my newborn baby. And I looked to my right, and the anaesthetist was there, just on his phone, just scrolling through his phone. I was like, oh, he's calm. He's fine. I was like, okay, she's just passed out.
Just checking out your socials.
Yeah. And then I looked at the heart rate monitor, and I was like, okay, there's still a heartbeat. And it was, but for those 10 seconds, I just thought I lost everything there. And then, yeah, she come to, and we were still on the table for however long. And yeah, it was just traumatic. And it wasn't until afterwards we found out that she lost, I think, 2.8 litres of blood, which is like over half of what she had in her body.
It's a lot of blood.
It's a lot of blood. Where they done the cesarean, they had to cut in a different location from the first cesarean because there's lots of scar tissue, so they had to cut higher up. As a result of that, she ended up having a tear down the side of her placenta, not the placenta, the uterus, which hemorrhaged, and that's where all the problems come. And I remember another moment where I thought, okay, this is bad, was when I remember we did some antenatal classes beforehand, and the women they was teaching us and telling us that in the birth it's normal to have 6, 7, 8 people running around if you're having an emergency cesarean. So the real problems come when there's like 20 people in the room. And when she passed out and I looked around and I saw like 20 people in the room, it was just a combination of everything just hitting the fan, to not use a swear word. And I was like, oh, like, yeah. So,
well, I think anyone listening to that can definitely hear the severity of it. Thankfully, your wife is healthy and has come through that, and you've got 2 beautiful boys. But there's no way that something like that isn't going to affect someone, let alone your wife. But for someone to see that, live through that, for someone that you care so much about, the mother of your children, That's going to scar someone. And I don't know how many times have you told anyone all of that before?
Close family, no. It's no secret that it wasn't a good birth. But ultimately, it's it's not something I've spoken about too much. But at the same time, like, I know what you're saying, like, it's hard. It's difficult for me at least, to label that as something that's affecting me now. Like, it's a weird thing, and it wasn't until I spoke to the therapist where he was like, "No, you have got PTSD. This is why sometimes you feel down, even if it's not relating to anything to do with that." Because, like I say, that whole process in my mind is done and dusted. Like, we got through it. Like I say, healthy boy, healthy wife, and we can move on with our life. So in my head, I've packaged it up and thrown it away. But I guess not weird, but I guess the thing with PTSD is that that's not the case. It is something that will affect you regardless of what you're doing at that time. It comes out of nowhere. Or at least that's what I'm learning. I'm still understanding it myself. I still don't truly believe that I fully have PTSD, because I'm also someone that I don't want to label things easily.
Yeah.
I'm sure some people do, but in my mind, PTSD is, you see like war veterans come around and like they're like shell shock, like that's like PTSD in my head, not this. But I guess it's something that comes in all sizes.
Yeah. We can edit this out, but what if you go on to have any further children?
What do you mean?
How would that affect the next birth? So you feel that the PTSD isn't necessarily there for you. I'm sure it is in some way, or even if it's affecting your wife and maybe the way that she is around you or the children, or she's forever a little bit more sort of careful in what she does. I don't know. I'm just thinking, if you go on to have another child, would all of what you both have been through with not normal births, that would make for probably a worrying third pregnancy.
I think we have spoke about this a lot, because we've always said, we'd want 3 kids, and ideally 2 boys and a girl. We got the 2 boys part, we just don't have the girl. And my wife definitely wants to try for a third, to see if we can roll the dice again and get a maybe girl. But for me, it 100% has changed my thought process on that. I think I would happily say, like, I'm done now. Don't get me wrong, I would love to have a daughter and I'd love to have a third, but at the same time, it's not worth the risk. Because if I lose my wife, or my future son or daughter, I don't think it's worth the risk. So we have spoken in depth about this, about what we would do, and I think ultimately, once we're in that position to potentially look to have a third, then we'll do every single test possible, everything we can to fully understand whether we can go through this process without those worries. And if there's any element of risk for me, then I'm going to have to say I can't go through with a third. I know you just said it then, pretty much, between you both, ideally you would like a daughter. You've got 2 boys. I know definitely, probably there's an episode in the future for, I think they call it, is it gender grief or gender, something to do with, I think it's gender disappointment, which is generally, I think, as far as I'm aware, where obviously
you know, if if you and your wife want a daughter and you have another boy, I know that deep down and the right thing to do and say is, yeah, we're happy either way. But at the same time, it's okay to say, I wish we had a daughter.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, we spoke about that. What happens if the third is a boy? Then
You go for a fourth.
no. no, no, not at all. And she's in the same boat as well.
Yeah.
It's not. I think it's one of them things. You'd like to have a girl and a boy, just for the fact of, I don't know what it is. I think most people do kind of want to have a girl and a boy, and for whatever reason,
I think it's probably the experience of both, isn't it?
Well, I think they're very different.
Yeah, as they grow up, predominantly different hobbies and different interests, different friend groups, and you get to experience, especially as they're getting older into teenagers, and they move on and have families and potentially, families of their own.
I think that's one. I think that's probably one element of it, because my wife is from a family of that very, very close, and I think the general outlook on the majority of cases, I don't know if this is true or not, it's just my feeling based on my friends, my family, everything of that nature. Men tend to leave their original family and join their wife or girlfriend's family in a lot more instances. I know that's the case with me. I definitely do a lot more with my wife's family than I do with my own. Whereas the females tend to stick with their families, and that's the feeling I get with that. But ultimately, yeah, I think going back to the original point of gender disappointment, I don't know until you get there. But for me, going back to having a third, I just think with everything we've gone through, if there's any element of risk, I think it's just a bit silly for us to roll the dice again and just hope it. Because I know it, we like because she is fine, but for that moment when she passed out, I genuinely thought she died. I genuinely thought she died in front of me, and that feeling of, I don't know, it's hard to describe. It just like I just vanished, or I don't know. It was just horrible, and luckily, obviously, that did only last for 10 seconds or 5 seconds, however long it was. But then I'm not sure.
You shouldn't downplay it though.
No, I'm not downplaying it.
Where you say you feel like you don't have PTSD and things, but if a therapist has picked you apart a little bit and said you have PTSD, they can see it in so many different angles and ways that you probably can't. So probably, I think it's something that you should probably look into more to try and address and maybe open up more with, because it might help you in the long run. There might be elements of, you might be stressed or drowsy or
but then I know, like,
short-tempered, and that, as weird as it can sound, could lead to certain elements of your past.
But for me, it's I'm no therapist. I don't understand the human brain the way they do. But just speaking openly here, like, I just don't understand how. Like, what do you do with that? Like, this is something that's in my past. It's something that has been dealt with. We're over it. It's not a problem in our life anymore. So what do you do with that PTSD? What do you... I can talk about it because it's not a problem anymore. So, like, how is that still affecting me today,
I mean, I'm no expert, but it sounds like you're plugging for an expert. So, if there is someone who could come on this sofa and explain it to us, then please reach out to the show, because we can pick apart and say we think it could be this, could be that, but maybe we need someone to actually tell our audience, because there's someone out there listening to this podcast or this episode in particular that without a doubt has had a normal birth, a bad birth, a normal bad birth, and they will probably be experiencing PTSD and also don't know how and what to do with it. So if someone can help us, then this is the platform for it.
Yeah, I think definitely, because although, yes, I am speaking to a therapist, I think it's just good to understand what it actually means, because I still, like, even though I'm speaking about it, I still don't really know what it means from that aspect. And yeah, it'll be great to hear from someone, have a conversation with someone on how it does actually impact you. Because like right now, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking like I say, it's done. It's in the past.
Do you think your relationship with your wife is different before having kids to after kids?
Yes.
And I would say mine is the same.
Yeah, but I don't think
for different reasons.
Yeah, but I don't think, even if you had the most normal, not normal, the most natural birth, your relationship's
But
going to change.
How you know?
Regardless.
You won't know that.
Well,
so
this is another thing.
You could have had 2 normal births, and I don't think that Lauren. I don't think Lauren's had the worst births going.
But this is it as well. So I didn't. I knew that the births that we had weren't great, but I also considered them normal bad. You know, like I considered them like, well, this is just what happens when people have to have cesareans. Like, it's just how they all go. And that might very well be. But ultimately, yeah, I think for me, it wasn't until recently where someone said to me, like, yeah, that's tough. But yeah, I guess I'm walking around looking at other parents thinking, well, you've gone through that as well. And maybe they haven't. Maybe they have. Maybe they've gone through worse. Maybe they haven't. It's just one of them things. It's like you don't. I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this, but ultimately, it's something where I'm now aware that it potentially has had an impact on me.
So you just need to unravel in what way?
I don't know. I'm still figuring that out with the therapist.
I think it's honourable, the fact that you're doing something about it. So you're seeing a therapist. Again, men don't want to admit that sometimes. Men don't. You know, I'm going to therapy, and I think it's good that you are, and they're obviously unpacking the fact that you potentially might have something.
Yeah.
And it's hopefully you can get to the bottom of what, why, and how to cope. Maybe improve your overall well-being for moving forward for your own family. So, yeah, I think that's probably a good way to end our pod.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate the episodes that you've done so far, and it couldn't have been hard. It couldn't have been easy. We've had some good comments and feedback, not just necessarily myself and Lauren on the show answering the questions that you've been giving us, but also as a friend, sitting there listening and giving those questions couldn't have been easy. So we've had a lot of people reach out and say how good a job that you're doing and the podcast is for them. So
yeah, it's a weird journey we're on right now.
Yeah.
Like, 12 months ago, didn't think we'd be doing anything like this. Well, no, that's a lie, because we talked about doing this 12 months ago. But you know what I'm saying.
Do you feel any relief from having shared all of that information? Kind of either in a weird way getting it off your chest, to even the detail that you might not have shared before?
I don't know. Honestly, at this stage, I don't know. I think it's still something that I'm trying to understand why I end up feeling the way I do about certain things. But again, like, I'm still trying to sit there thinking, like, this is just how everyone else is. This is just how everyone else life is, and they're stressed about this or they're feeling down about that. But yeah, I mean, obviously with the stuff that we're doing and what you're saying about talking and how we're getting to, what we're doing here with the pod is, it's definitely the first time I'm talking about things
Mm.
that I probably wouldn't have talked about in the way that I'm talking about them. So although, you know, I would have mentioned them in the past, I wouldn't talked about them in the way of addressing the situations. So yeah, I don't know. I think I'm still trying to understand where I sit with all this. I feel like I'm in a really good place with it, especially now. I know a few months back I wasn't. So from my point of view, this podcast and talking to you and you opening up about your life and your situations has helped me progress with how I deal with things as well. Because, yeah, it goes back to that original point of the podcast, which is just to talk. And I think I said on another episode, which may or may not be released, I'm not sure what order these are all going out, but ultimately it's because of this show that I think I have slowly, and from a selfish point of view, it's benefited me in understanding and talking, and it's just helped. It's just helped in whereas previously I wouldn't have talked about stuff.
It's nice to hear, like, as your friend. That's nice to hear that, you know, what we're doing isn't just hopefully helping an audience that are listening, but we're helping each other. Like,
Yeah,
you know, Lauren, after the first episode she did, how nervous she was. She
Yeah.
came out of it so, you know, she had a glow. Like, she just managed to get a load of stuff off her chest. And it goes for me and you. Like, we're helping each other. And as I said in that first episode or two, it was, you know, selfishly, maybe a bit of therapy for both of us. And hopefully there's at least one person that has been through something similar to what you have and can resonate with some of the stuff that you've spoke about, and then they're not feeling so alone as maybe you might have felt. So I think we should wrap this episode up. Appreciate you being on the answering end of the questions today, and we'll see you again on the next episode. Goodbye.